here. So I think thank you for inviting all of us here, and it's been really nice to look at the process that we've been going through. We chose something, Nithya and I chose something that's very simple, very close to our hearts, because that's something we talk about a lot in the office, and we do this as well. So it's training. Training is 2 semesters, 32 weeks, 15 marks every 15 minutes. There's a Viva OC at the end of training, and then you have 300 marks. So that's like 600 marks at the end of 1 year. Yeah. So I think in the new course, it looks like every architecture school is going to have a 1 year training. So 1 year is essentially 20% of the time that a student spends studying architecture. So perhaps design courses across the earlier 4 years sort of cumulatively may compete with the training, but that's a huge chunk of time that a student is expected to spend in offices learning architecture. So obviously it becomes really an important aspect of how training is done. We have some very simple practical observations, or I just want to give you a little bit of background on where these are coming from. We run a small practice, about 20-25 architects. We, on the other hand, historically have always had lots of trainings. Even when we were 8 or 10 architects, we used to have 8 to 10 trainees, sometimes 7 to 8 trainees. At this time, we have in the office currently 16 trainees. So that's a very large number. We actually run a training school program within the office. We have a person who teaches them Revit, somebody who does CAD, somebody who works on models with them. We take every site visit, the car is packed like a bus. There is at least 4 trainees in the car along with the architect. The architects have to take at least 4 trainees with them, otherwise they have to explain to me. The idea comes from a series of observations which I have put down here, and what really we feel about the training. But I want to sort of step back and see at the end of 4th year, which is when we are sort of sending the students out for training. What is perhaps a simple guideline that can be prepared so that the student has a better shot at getting that nicer experience at 1 year of training. And then of course the office also has to get some kind of return from the training. So the first is, I think, preparing a CV and a portfolio of works. Most of the time I see, I think some of it maybe Vatsala's communication course has a lot to talk about in the first year. But I see that, it's the same CV, it's cut paste. I know if I've seen the CV, it's, it's Miyasi or it's wherever. And they're all using the same format, and they're all, the information is true to the best of their knowledge about themselves. So I don't know why that disclaimer is there, but it is there, and they're all the same. But I think CV and portfolio works is really critical, and if you ask for a portfolio, we'll get 16 AutoCAD drawings sent to us, and your openings drawing and see what it looks like. So we have to specify. So we have a document that we send back to the training saying not more than 2 MB, use Dropbox, do this. So some of these points come from that. So the portfolio, really what we are looking is to communicate the passion for architecture. We really don't want to see working drawings, or we don't want to see AutoCAD drawings. Whatever they feel is their passion for architecture, it should communicate that. What we are suggesting is that this can actually go down in black and white in print and get distributed as part of an annexure to the syllabus, some of it as part of the syllabus. So it gives everybody a clear guideline. Some of them appear obvious, but if they were obvious, they should already have been in practice. But since they are not, it's probably worthwhile to take a second look at it. A short list of architecture studios the student is interested in, because we get a lot of training applications. We get over maybe 600, 700 applications a year, sometimes close to 1,000. And we find that many of them apply without knowing who they have applied to, what they have applied for, what is the nature of the work. And I'll be sitting across the table and say, what is it that you like? And they will be like, well, we like to work with mud blocks. And I'm like, have you seen our work? There isn't a single mud block in any of them. Does it make sense? Why haven't you looked at the right person, right? So that happens all the time. So I think these kind of guidelines may help the student. Maybe there's a sort of orientation at the end of 4th year to sort of prepare them for it. So studying the work that the office does that they want to go to, send an application via email. Most of the time we get an application saying, I want to do training at your office. I don't know when it is, what they are studying and what they want to do. And I'm sure it's sort of this generic idea across offices this happens. So with very simple format, we can create some of these formats and also make it part of annexures of the syllabus. And that's, you already have it at the office, and we'd be happy to share several of them.
Also very clearly stating the difference, they say I want to apply as a junior architect, but they really haven't finished, because they finished the 4 years of school. They think that
It's a continuation.
Yeah, I think the newer applications are coming now as junior architect, because I think 4 years they are done, and in the last year training is actually junior architect. But those are workplace. But it's more important, I think, for them to understand how to sort of conduct themselves when they talk to an office, how to give themselves the best shot. Because by not representing themselves well, they're actually sort of negating the possibility of working with a good office or in a good system. And most of them send generic emails, so I will have an email that's copied to Sujit, an architecture paradigm, and Hawker, and saying to whomsoever it may concern. It just doesn't work, because regardless of how good the person is, you probably don't open the attachment itself most of the time. It's very frustrating to see that. So simple things like not sending a generic email, sending out emails to different offices separately, ensure that it is sent with enough time. I think there is a sort of panic about 2 weeks before the training is to start, and I get a lot of calls from parents who know other kids saying he or she has not gotten anywhere, can you take them in the office? So we have 4 such people now training in our office. The second part is the brief to the student during the training itself. I think students sort of, you've seen all kinds. You've seen really proactive students, you've seen very, very quiet, inactive students. So for some of them, it's like an year's vacation that they're out in some other city and they're hanging around, making new friends and looking at what's around. And for some of them, they take it rather seriously. For the office, for us, it's been always, if we have about 15 to 20% of the trainees have come back always to work with us. And all the architects that I have, of the 10 to 12 senior architects, all trained with me 12 years ago, 8 years ago, 7 years ago. So the training is actually a very, very crucial part. And right now, I think I have a feeling that it is, each has to make the best of what they want to make, or some of them don't sort of get it and they get the raw end of the stick for during training. So basic things like following office guidelines, I think we find that they're very sort of lax about timings. They don't really understand what it means to keep an office timing. And some of that briefing could help earlier. I think this is probably taking a little bit of liberty, but as an office, I would be happy to receive a sort of letter from the architecture school giving us a sort of guidance on what they expect from training. We do get sometimes some very generic guidance, but that doesn't give us enough to go on. So we have sort of made out, I think, for ourselves, saying what is it that we want to do when the training comes to you. And the answer is very simple. We don't want to take the role of the school, because we're not a school, we are an office. So we want to maybe able to share with them the best of what the office does. I think that should be the target. I don't want to say that teach them design skills, conceptual design. We are not, the time and the process, that has to be imbibed as we go along, and that's sort of an offshoot, but that's not the core concern. What we are trying to do is treat it as professional training and say give them adequate exposure to how a professional environment is, and part of the timing and all the other points have to do with that. So we have these are things that we do, and it could be suggested, and depending on the scale of the office, it could be a short introduction or it could be slightly more elaborate. We have almost like a week's induction program now where we teach them about, because what we found is we put them to work on day one and give them an AutoCAD file. 4 days later, that file is useless. I mean, somebody said, look, I got to go back and redraw everything because line thicknesses are wrong things have been matched in terms of properties. So it actually takes us back in time, and so we realized, when we work on CAD and Revit, that it makes sense to, tell them about layer systems, tell them about how files are stored in the office, how do you back it up, who writes what, who overwrites. I've had people saying, the files lost a week of work, and she overwrote something. It's very complex the way an office works, especially if you have X labs and one X lab is wrongly deleted, you get into a mess. So I think the orientation in our office has taken almost like a 4 or 5 day process where we talk to them about how the office is organized and inducted. That's why I really like the idea that the training now is half a year rather than earlier they used to be like this very short training, some of them 70 days, 80 days, 90 days, and they used to sort of be ready to leave before they got in. I think a longer period of training now is actually helping get them sort of more adjusted. Basic guidance states what is in the syllabus, expose the student to various facets of architectural practice. Guidance outline for same is given below, if you follow. You have a daily record of activities that are done, duly verified, attested by the office. I think this is something that we would like to also talk about and maybe develop formats for that in consultation with a few other offices. If a stipend can be paid to the student during the internship, it will be appreciated. I think it's fair of the school to send that out to the offices. Several of them pay differing values. Some of them maybe are not paying yet, but there's no harm in sort of putting that down. The training report itself, I think that can get a little bit more elaborate, and we'll talk about that as we go along. There's a certificate of experience and students' performance evaluation, for which we have some ideas. The outline is mostly picked out of the book, and it's, I think, what every architecture office does, so there's not too much to sort of get into elaborate details on this. But the idea is to give a breakdown, which is simple, and let's say there are 12 or 14 points here. If the student is spending 6 months in one office, has managed to deal with 6 or 5 of these points more, it would be nice to focus on the other parts so that the entire training process is clear. So there are design ideas, how do you produce drawings, 3D models, either physical or computer models, understanding of statutory requirements. And this is basically the life cycle of every project in an office. Depending on where they are sort of drawn into a project, I think all of it will get they'll get exposed to. I think understanding the nature of flow of work, instruction in a studio setup, teamwork, working with other trainings and architects together, these are things that we have sort of found gaps in, and that's really where we are trying to spend more time with them in terms of effective communication. We do sort of take them for a lot of meetings, especially on site meetings, without sort of worrying about 3 people trooping in extra to the site meeting from our side. So they started liking those things, and after every site meeting we ask them to make a small report, a set of sketches and so on. So those are slowly improving, but I think while they may not be able to do all of this in one training session, it would be nice to see as many of these done, and an instruction to the office to that promptly. This part I think needs to sort of change, especially now since we are getting into a year of training. That's a lot of time the student is spending away from the school without your direct supervision, and you have trusted them with either a small office, big office, 1 or 2 person offices also can have trainings, and that might be the best training a student undergoes. But from the school side, I think it is important to set up an entire mechanism which evaluates what is it that the training period has given the student in that 1 year, and then evaluate it. In fact, let's say 600 marks totally on the 2 trainings, you should allow for up to about 150 marks to be somehow contributed from the office in terms of evaluation. Because what is happening is, you send them to the office is with them for a year, and they come and give you a snapshot in 15 minutes in the Viva Voski, and then you have 600 marks to give them. So I don't know what the mechanism is. It could be 50, 50, 25, 75, whatever you feel works better in an academic environment. But it would be good to have the office either assess and you use the marks, or you suggest an assessment and then you figure out, looking at the work they are presenting and the suggested assessment, how to incorporate that for 15 minutes or 30 minutes, 15 plus 15, 30 minutes, and you evaluate them based on that, and you not really ask the office what do they think, and the performance of this student has been found satisfactory, and that's really what is like one of those character certificates, character satisfactory. That's all you get. Right? So if you want to get that, I think we should have like an evaluation from the office, regardless of the size of the office. And I'm sure offices will be happy to do that, because they are young, they bring in new ideas, they're hardworking, they sort of relentless the way they're around the office. And also, it's a great way to look for architects in the future. So maybe these things have to get a little bit more sophisticated as we go along. What we used to do as an officer, we still do, is we sort of insist that several of these reports are done when they are in the training period in the office, and then binding and making it a nice A3, presenting it well. Those are the things that we sort of at least try and supervise. And all the work that they have done in the office, we try to make sure they represent well. So there is a training report which is, I think, which is nice. Maybe more strictures on what the format is, size is, because like instead of suggesting the idea of documentation, it's also good to have some level of sameness and reference within the institution itself. Let's say if you had a record of students training over the last 10 years, and there was this pile of A3 books, and if I am a new trainee, I want to go train somewhere, all I need to do is spend a half hour with those books, and I know which side of which office I'm gravitating towards, which one I like, what is the kind of work they do. And right now these tend to get lost. I think there's not, because somebody will bring, I've seen even when they come for interviews, they'll have rolled up thesis drawing, somebody will have A3, somebody will have a folded sheet of A4 which they'll unfold. So there's no standardization. Those things really are not things that we feel need to be said, but since it's not happening, I think it's better to sort of look at it. So the training report, the building study report, the building material study, the site study report, which is really critical. I think trainees go to site all the time, and it's important for them to sort of get a sense of what they are doing. Somehow in the office, the architects have taken a fancy to this idea of training. They probably feel they're in a school. So what they do is when they go to the site, on the way they sort of brief them on the project and the status, and they spend 3-4 hours. When they come back, they actually have a quiz in the car. Several of the sites are 2 hours away. So I've seen quite a bit of building going on from the architects. So I think there is good traction there, suggesting that idea. A book report seems to be something I think more and more we keep coming back to that idea of communication. I think in some roundabout way that most of them are unable to sort of communicate basics about what their interest in architecture is, what they are doing around it. My conversations are very typically this: who's your favorite architect? Frank Lloyd Wright. Comes like that. It takes like 2 seconds to come. Next, Corbusier. Okay. Can you name somebody living? And they looked at me for a while and they said, "Do you can't?" I said, "No, he's dead." So it's very difficult to get them to sort of communicate and move, and they feel very scared, like they're under the scanner. And so I think reading books. So I have a very simple, funny idea. We have a library full of books. There's about 800 books there. We have a list of books. So every trainee who comes in has to go to the library and find all the 800 books in that list and take it and tell us that they're all still in there in the library. So at least they get to see 800 titles, and they spend actually 2 days in the library doing nothing but a checklist and checking that. So all the trainees have done that, and they kind of hate us for it, I think. But I'm really happy for them to know names of architects, to know names of books, to know that these books exist, and a few of them obviously will get curious and go on. But these are things that can be, I think, from a quite invaluable in the way that they work. So you have, I think, the idea that the student has a choice of working with the same or different forms. At least people who are applying to us say that, look, 6 months later, they're happy to tell us that I'll evaluate. If I'm happy, I may continue, otherwise I'll go to another office. So we like that. I mean, that's fine. They can spend 6 months or a year, and it's really their call. But I think it's important to have a sort of system in that. Candidate failing has to start afresh. I don't know if anybody's ever failed at trainings, but the evaluation process has to get stricter. I mean, I'm like an outsider in this process. I don't know how you evaluate, but I can only think that they've spent a year with me, and then you get to see 30 minutes, and then you are evaluating. So maybe you should also think about talking to us about it at that point. So towards the end of training, the architecture studio, we request to prepare an assessment of the trainee's performance. I think there needs to be, we started working on a format for that, and it would be useful to send that out to offices. It should contribute to, I said tentatively we've said 25% of the total assessment. But I think it also makes sure that the student takes the training program quite seriously, because at the end of the day, what they are presenting in that 15 minutes are drawings which they may have drawn part of. You can't really deny them drawings. If somebody says, look, I worked on this part of the project, I want to take the drawing and the site plan, you say yes, of course, no problem, right? So that's the next part. There's one more slide. Is there one more? No. Okay, that was the assessment. So the last one really was to look at how you can assess, and you can change the idea that you spend a year with someone, you ask them. How much you ask them is really up to you. So, yeah, those are ideas for training. Thank you.